Seconds before the arrest, a homeless man reveals the evidence that saves the accused billionaire. Richard Thompson walked between two security guards toward the vehicle that would take him to the police station. The handcuffs weighed on his wrists like the weight of the injustice that was about to swallow him whole. That's when the shouts echoed through the courthouse parking lot. A man in torn clothes and an unkempt beard ran toward him, holding a brown envelope with trembling hands. It was Henry, the same homeless man Richard saw every day at the door of his office and always ignored with disdain. "Wait! Wait!" Henry shouted, breathless. "He's innocent. I have the proof." The security guard escorting Richard made a move to push the homeless man away, but something in that man's desperation made the businessman stop. During 40 years of building his empire, Richard had never paid attention to the homeless man who slept on the sidewalk in front of his company's building. Now that same man he considered invisible was running to save him. "What are you saying, asked Richard, his voice choked with emotion. Henry opened the envelope with trembling fingers, revealing yellowed and partially burned papers. "I found these documents in the trash 3 weeks ago. Someone tried to burn them, but I managed to save a few pages. They prove you didn't embezzle any money." The accusations against Richard Thompson had emerged suddenly, like a storm that destroys everything in its path. Someone had planted evidence that he had embezzled millions of dollars from his employees' pension funds. The district attorney's office had presented documents that seemed irrefutable, bank transfers that apparently came from accounts controlled by him. Over the last 2 months, Richard had watched his life fall apart, piece by piece. His wife, Catherine, who had been by his side for 30 years, began to question everything she thought she knew about her husband. His daughter, Amanda, 28 years old, avoided his calls and refused to visit him. The most painful part was the distrust in their own eyes. Catherine looked at him during dinner as if he were a stranger. 40 years of marriage, building a family, sharing dreams and achievements. Everything seemed to have lost its meaning in the face of the accusations. "Why did you keep these papers?" asked Richard, holding the burned documents. Henry lowered his eyes. "Because I know what it's like to be judged without a chance to defend myself. I've lived on the streets for 15 years. People pass by me every day as if I were a ghost. When I saw someone burning documents in the middle of the night near your building, I thought it was strange." The security guard looked at his watch, impatient. "Mr. Thompson, we need to go to the police station." "Just 1 more minute," Richard pleaded, examining the papers. His hands trembled as he recognized numbers that made no sense in the accusations against him. "Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out." Now, continuing, Amanda Thompson was at the law firm when she received the call about what had happened in the courthouse parking lot. Over the last few months, she had struggled between loyalty to the father she had always admired and the evidence that seemed to show a side of him she didn't know. With a degree in business administration, Amanda had always worked in the family business. She knew every process, every department, every employee. That's why the accusations left her even more confused. The numbers didn't make sense to someone who knew the business from the inside. "Was Dad released?" she asked the family lawyer, Mr. Harold. "For now, yes." The documents the homeless man brought raised enough doubts for the judge to grant more time for analysis. "But Amanda, you need to understand that this doesn't automatically clear him." Amanda left the office with a heavy heart. Outside, she found her mother, Catherine, sitting on a bench in a nearby park. At 55, Catherine seemed to have aged a decade in the last few weeks. "Mum, are you all right?" Catherine looked at her daughter with eyes swollen from crying. "I don't know what to believe anymore, Amanda. Your father has always been an honest man, at least that's what I thought. But these accusations, the documents, how could I have lived 30 years with someone without truly knowing him? Mum, what if he really is innocent? And what if he isn't?" Catherine's voice broke. "What if I've spent all these years married to a man capable of stealing working people's retirement money? How will I look at his employees' wives? How will I look at myself in the mirror?" Amanda hugged her mother, feeling the weight of uncertainty that was consuming the whole family. There was something about the accusations that didn't add up, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. That same afternoon, Richard was in his office for the first time in weeks. The space that once represented achievement and pride now felt like a battlefield. His secretary, Mrs. Nancy, who had worked with him for 20 years, greeted him with a forced smile. "Mr. Thompson, it's good to see you back. There's a lot piled up here." "Mrs. Nancy, I need you to be honest with me. Do you believe I'm capable of what they're accusing me of?" The 60-year-old woman stopped organizing the papers and looked directly at him. "Mr. Thompson, I've worked by your side for 2 decades. I saw you cry when we had to let people go during the 2015 recession. I saw you pay for Samuel's daughter's medicine out of your own pocket when she was sick. A man who does that doesn't steal retirement money." Mrs. Nancy's words brought a moment of relief to Richard, but he knew the battle was only beginning. He picked up the phone and called Henry, who was now temporarily staying at a shelter Richard had paid for. "Henry, I need to know everything you saw that night. Every detail could be important." The homeless man's voice sounded tired on the other end of the line. "It was almost 2 in the morning, Mr. Thompson. I was trying to sleep when I saw a woman coming out the back door of your building. She was carrying a bag and dumped some papers into a trash can, then set them on fire." "A woman? Can you describe her?" "Blonde hair, about your daughter's age, wearing a dark coat. When she noticed I was watching, she got nervous and ran off." Richard felt a chill down his spine. Very few people had access to the building after business hours, and Henry's description could fit several female employees at the company. That night, Richard had dinner at home for the first time in weeks. The silence at the table was deafening. Catherine pushed her food around without eating, lost in thought. Amanda tried to keep a normal conversation going, but the tension was palpable. "Dad, who had access to the building that night?" asked Amanda, breaking the silence. "Besides me and security, a few people from the board and some trusted employees." "Why do you ask?" Amanda told him about the conversation Richard had had with Henry. As she recounted the details, she saw her mother's face pale. "A blonde woman about my age," murmured Catherine. "Richard, you don't think it could be—" "Let's not make accusations without proof," interrupted Richard. But his mind was already working through the possibilities. After dinner, Richard locked himself in his home office and began reviewing the list of people who had access to the building. Among the names, one stood out. Jennifer Hayes, the finance manager, had worked at the company for 5 years and had unrestricted access to the systems. Jennifer was a capable woman, educated at the best universities, and Richard had always trusted her completely. But in recent months before the accusations emerged, he had noticed some changes in her behavior. She arrived earlier, left later, seemed nervous in meetings. The next day, Richard decided to investigate on his own. He arrived early at the office and went straight to the finance department. Jennifer hadn't arrived yet, but her desk was too organized, as if it had been cleaned on purpose. "Mrs. Nancy, has Jennifer been acting strange lately?" "Now that you mention it, yes. In recent weeks she's been working a lot alone, especially at night. She said she was organizing some special reports." Richard decided to check the building access logs. As the owner, he had the right to this information. What he discovered left him with even more questions. Jennifer had been in the building on the night Henry saw the woman burning documents, but the log showed she had left at 10 p.m., 4 hours before the incident. This meant 2 things. Either the logs were wrong or Jennifer had returned without logging her entry. Both possibilities pointed to something suspicious. When Jennifer arrived at work, Richard observed her discreetly. She seemed to avoid his gaze and appeared particularly nervous. During a routine meeting, when he mentioned the new documents found, he saw her hands tremble slightly. "Jennifer, could you stay after the meeting? I need to discuss some numbers with you." Her face paled, but she agreed. When they were alone in the meeting room, Richard decided to test her. "Jennifer, I need you to review all the transfers made in recent weeks, especially those related to the pension funds." "Mr. Richard, I've already reviewed everything several times. I didn't find anything irregular." "Then how do you explain the evidence the district attorney's office presented?" Jennifer stood up abruptly, knocking over the chair. "I need to go to the restroom." She left the room almost running, leaving Richard even more convinced that something was wrong. He decided to follow a hunch and went to her desk. Among the papers, he found a post-it note with numbers he didn't recognize. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Richard took a picture of the numbers with his cell phone and returned to his office. He was determined to discover the truth, not just to clear himself of the accusations, but to understand how his life had turned into a nightmare. That afternoon he received an unexpected call. It was from his sister, Susan, who lived in the countryside of Chicago and rarely got in touch. "Richard, I saw the news on television. I can't believe what they're saying about you." "Susan, it's complicated. Someone is trying to harm me, but I haven't found out who yet." "Brother, remember when we were kids and you always said that the truth always comes out in the end? I'm sure this time won't be any different." The conversation with Susan brought back memories of a simpler time when problems were solved with a frank talk and a hug. Richard decided it was time to be more direct in his investigation. He called Dr. Harold and asked him to get a complete copy of the building access logs for the last 3 months. He also requested that a discreet private investigator look into Jennifer's personal life. "Richard, this could be dangerous if she's really involved and finds out you're investigating." "Dr. Harold, my reputation, my family, everything is at stake. I need to know the truth." While waiting for the investigation results, Richard tried to maintain a normal routine at work, but the tension was palpable. The employees greeted him with less enthusiasm. Some avoided his gaze. He knew people were divided between loyalty and doubt. At home, the situation wasn't any better. Catherine had started therapy to deal with the emotional crisis. Amanda divided her time between supporting her parents and trying to keep the company running. The family that had always been his fortress now seemed as fragile as crystal. It was during one of these difficult nights that Richard received a call from Henry. "Mr. Thompson, I remembered one more thing. That night, when the woman saw me, she dropped something. I picked it up later and kept it, thinking it wasn't important." "What was it?" "A key. A small key, like one for a drawer or cabinet." Richard felt his heart race. "Henry, do you still have that key?" "Yes, I do. It's here with me." The next day, Richard met with Henry and took the key. It was indeed small, the type used for desk drawers or personal cabinets. He returned to the office with the key in his pocket, determined to discover what it opened. He started trying it on the desks in the finance department. Most drawers were unlocked, but one desk caught his attention, that of Stephen Wilson, chief accountant and right-hand man to Jennifer. Stephen had worked at the company for 8 years and had always been considered extremely reliable. But recently Richard had noticed that he and Jennifer spent a lot of time talking in private. The key fit perfectly into the main drawer of Stephen's desk. Inside, Richard found something that made his blood run cold. Drafts of bank transfers with his forged signature and notes about phantom accounts. Among the papers, there were also photographs of Richard's personal documents, including copies of his ID and credit cards. It was evident that someone had meticulously planned his downfall. But what shocked him most was finding a handwritten letter, still in draft form, that Stephen was apparently writing. The letter was addressed to Jennifer and contained phrases like, "I can no longer live with this guilt, and we need to tell the truth before it's too late." Richard photographed everything and left the documents exactly as they were. He knew he needed more evidence before confronting anyone. He immediately called Mr. Harold. "Doctor, I found concrete evidence. Stephen and Jennifer are involved in the conspiracy against me." "Calm down, Richard. Let's do this the right way. We can't let them destroy the evidence." That night, Richard barely slept. The puzzle pieces were starting to come together, but he still needed to understand the motive. Why would 2 people he trusted so much be willing to destroy his life? The next day, he decided to discreetly observe Stephen and Jennifer's behavior. He arrived early at the office and positioned himself so he could see them without being noticed. Around 9 in the morning, he saw the 2 talking intensely near the coffee machine. Jennifer seemed agitated, gesturing a lot, while Stephen kept his head down. When other employees approached, they quickly separated. During lunch, Richard decided to follow Stephen. The accountant left the building and walked to a nearby diner, where he met with a woman about 40 years old whom Richard didn't recognize. The conversation between them seemed tense. The woman handed Stephen an envelope, which he quickly put in his inner jacket pocket. When Stephen returned to the office, he seemed even more nervous than before. Richard knew he needed to find out who that woman was. He called the private investigator that Mr. Harold had hired and described the scene. The investigator promised to identify her within a few days. Meanwhile, Richard decided to talk to some long-time employees, people he trusted completely. Mrs. Margaret from the cleaning staff had worked at the company since the beginning and knew all the employees like they were family. "Mrs. Margaret, have you noticed anything different in Stephen and Jennifer's behavior lately?" The woman looked around to make sure no one was listening. "Mr. Richard, I didn't want to say anything because I'm not sure, but they've been meeting after work. Sometimes I stay late to finish cleaning and I see them talking in her office." "How long has this been going on?" "About 3-4 months. And there's something else. Last week, when I went to clean Stephen's desk, I found a torn paper in the trash. I put the pieces together because I thought it was strange. It was a note about bank accounts." Mrs. Margaret went to her locker and brought the pieces of paper she had collected. When Richard assembled the puzzle, he saw account numbers that matched some of the falsified transfers used in the accusations against him. "Mrs. Margaret, why did you keep this?" "I don't know, Mr. Richard. 40 years married to a suspicious man taught me to pay attention to details. When I saw on television about the accusations against you, I remembered these papers." Richard thanked her and carefully stored the fragments. He was building a solid case, but he knew he needed more evidence to prove not only his innocence, but also Stephen and Jennifer's direct involvement. That afternoon, he received a call from the private investigator. "Mr. Thompson, I managed to identify the woman. It's Rebecca Miller, a former bank employee who manages your company's pension funds. She was fired 6 months ago for irregularities." The pieces were finally starting to come together. Rebecca had access to banking systems, Stephen knew the company's internal processes, and Jennifer had authorization to make transfers. Together, they formed the perfect trio for the fraud. But Richard still needed to understand why Stephen and Jennifer had turned against him. Stephen had always been well treated at the company, had a good salary and prospects for growth. Jennifer was also in a comfortable and respected position. The answer came unexpectedly. While reviewing old human resources documents, Richard found something interesting in Stephen's file. 3 years ago, the accountant had requested a loan from the company to pay for his daughter's medical treatment. The request was denied because the amount exceeded the limit set by internal policy. Richard vaguely remembered the situation. At the time, he suggested that Stephen look for other alternatives, but he didn't follow up on how things turned out. Now he realized that perhaps that decision had planted a seed of resentment. He decided to investigate Stephen's personal situation more deeply. He discovered that Stephen had gone deeply into debt to pay for his daughter's treatment, who fortunately made a full recovery. But the debts remained, and Stephen was being sued for not being able to pay. As for Jennifer, the investigation revealed something surprising. She was in a relationship with Rebecca Miller, the former bank employee. The two kept their relationship secret, especially in the professional environment. The motivation was becoming clear. Stephen needed money to pay off his debts and resented not receiving help from the company when he needed it most. Jennifer was emotionally involved with someone who had been wronged by the banking system and wanted revenge. Rebecca, with her banking knowledge and access to privileged information, was the mastermind behind the plan. She knew exactly how to create convincing evidence and how to make the transfers look legitimate. Richard felt torn between anger at the betrayal and understanding of the human motivations behind the actions. He knew he needed to act quickly before more evidence was destroyed or the trio tried to flee. He called Dr. Harold and scheduled an urgent meeting. It was time to hand over all the evidence to the authorities and clear his name for good. "Dr. Harold, we have enough evidence to prove my innocence and identify the real culprits. But I want to do this the right way, without personal vendettas. Richard, this shows the upstanding man you truly are. Let's present everything to the district attorney tomorrow." That night, Richard finally managed to sleep peacefully for the first time in months. He knew the battle wasn't over yet, but he finally saw light at the end of the tunnel. The next day, before the meeting with the district attorney, Richard decided to talk to Stephen. He wanted to give him the opportunity to confess voluntarily, perhaps securing a deal that would be more favorable for everyone. He called Stephen to a private meeting in his office. The accountant entered visibly nervous, his hands trembling slightly. "Stephen, we've worked together for 8 years. I always considered you an exemplary employee and an honest person. Mr. Thompson, Let me finish. I know about the difficulties you went through with your daughter's treatment. I know about your debts. And I know you're involved in the accusations against me." Stephen collapsed in the chair, covering his face with his hands. "How did you find out?" "The truth always finds a way to come out, Stephen. The question now is, what are we going to do about it?" Stephen began to cry, releasing months of accumulated guilt and regret. "Mr. Thompson, I never wanted it to come to this. When Jennifer approached me with the proposal, I was desperate. My daughter was fine, but the debts were killing me. And how did Jennifer get involved in this? Her girlfriend, Rebecca, was fired from the bank and was very resentful. She knew how to manipulate the systems and convinced Jennifer that businessmen like you only care about profit, not people." Richard listened in silence, trying to understand how the situation had reached this point. "Stephen, do you realize this destroyed my life? My family is in pieces. My reputation was ruined. Employees lost trust in me." "I know, Mr. Thompson. I haven't slept in weeks. I was writing a letter to confess everything, but I didn't have the courage to turn it in. There's still time to do the right thing. Come with me to the district attorney today and tell the truth. I'll ask them to take your personal situation and your voluntary confession into account." Stephen looked at Richard in surprise. "You would do that for me, after everything I did?" "Stephen, I made a mistake 3 years ago when I denied your loan request without looking for alternatives. Maybe if I had been more attentive to my employees' needs, none of this would have happened." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing, Stephen's confession was the first domino to fall. With tears in his eyes, he told the district attorney every detail of the scheme. How Rebecca had devised the plan, how Jennifer had facilitated access to the company's systems, and how he had falsified documents. Jennifer was called to testify that same day. When confronted with the evidence and Stephen's confession, she also broke down. She revealed how Rebecca had convinced her that they were bringing justice against a system she considered unfair. "She made me believe that businessmen like you, Mr. Thompson, only cared about profit," said Jennifer, avoiding looking directly at him. "She said we would never be caught because the system always protects the rich." Rebecca was arrested that same day, trying to board a flight abroad. With her, the authorities found documents detailing the entire scheme and evidence of other frauds she had committed in the past. The case made newspaper headlines. "Businessman cleared. Employees confess conspiracy." For Richard, seeing his innocence proven publicly brought relief, but also deep reflection on how he had run his company and his personal relationships. His family's reaction was immediate. Catherine, who had spent months questioning everything she believed, returned home that same night. "Richard, forgive me for doubting you," she said, hugging her husband tightly. "But this experience has made me think about many things. About us, about our family, about what really matters." Amanda also reconciled with her father, but brought up important concerns. "Dad, how are we going to rebuild the employees' trust? How are we going to make sure something like this doesn't happen again?" They were difficult but necessary questions. Richard knew that clearing his name was just the beginning. He needed to rebuild his company and his relationships in a more solid and human way. The first step was to create an emergency fund to help employees in difficult situations, like the one Stephen had faced. He also implemented a more open communication system where any employee could express concerns or needs directly to the board. Henry, the homeless man who had saved Richard at the last moment, became a special figure in the family's life. Richard offered him a job at the company, but Henry preferred to continue his work on the streets, helping other vulnerable residents. "Mr. Thompson, my place is here with these people," Henry said when he visited the office to receive a donation that Richard made monthly to the shelter. "But now I know there are good people willing to help when needed." The relationship between Richard and Henry evolved into a genuine friendship. The businessman began spending some afternoons talking with Henry about life, about social differences, about the importance of looking beyond appearances. It was Henry who made Richard truly understand the impact of his decisions. "Mr. Thompson, when you denied the loan to Stephen, you saw only numbers and policies. But he saw a desperate father trying to save his daughter." These conversations transformed Richard's perspective on leadership and social responsibility. He began implementing changes that went beyond the financial aspect of the company. Stephen, after confessing everything, received a lighter sentence due to his cooperation. Richard interceded on his behalf, arguing that personal circumstances and genuine remorse should be considered. Stephen performed community service and had to repay part of the money, but he was not imprisoned. "Why are you helping me?" Stephen asked during one of the hearings. "Because I believe in second chances, and because I recognize that I also made mistakes that contributed to this situation." Jennifer faced more severe consequences for being considered one of the masterminds of the scheme. She lost her job and had to pay heavy fines. Rebecca, as the mastermind of it all, received the harshest sentence. The relationship between Jennifer and Rebecca did not survive the pressure of events. Jennifer realized how she had been manipulated and how her own insecurities had been exploited. 6 months after being cleared, Richard held a general meeting with all the company employees. He wanted to speak openly about everything that had happened and about the changes being implemented. "I want to apologize to all of you," he said, standing before more than 200 employees, "not for the false accusations, but for having been a leader who was too distant. Because I didn't create an environment where you felt comfortable sharing your difficulties." Richard's speech was moving. He announced the creation of an emergency fund, new communication channels, psychological assistance programs, and an evaluation system where employees could give feedback on the company's management. "I learned that a company isn't just about profits and growth. It's about people. It's about creating an environment where everyone can thrive and where no one feels invisible or undervalued." The transformation in the company was gradual but noticeable. Trust was rebuilt day by day. Employees began approaching management more often, suggesting improvements and sharing ideas. 1 year after the events, the company was stronger than ever. Not just financially, but in terms of organizational culture and human relationships. At home, the Thompson family also grew stronger. Catherine went back to school, fulfilling her long-time dream of taking psychology courses. She wanted to use her experience to help other families going through similar crises. "This experience showed me how important it is not to judge by appearances," she said during a family dinner. "How many times do we pass by people like Henry on the street and fail to see their humanity?" Amanda took on a more active role in the company, implementing social responsibility programs. Under her leadership, the company began hiring people in socially vulnerable situations and developing community projects. The most significant change occurred in Richard's perspective on success and fulfillment. He began measuring success not just by financial numbers, but by the positive impact his company had on people's lives. "Dad, you seem happier now than before all this happened," Amanda observed during one of their conversations. "It's because I learned that true success isn't what you accumulate, but what you build in relationships with people," Richard replied. The relationship with Henry remained strong. The homeless man became a kind of informal advisor to Richard, offering a unique perspective on life and how to see beyond social differences. Henry also benefited from the friendship. With Richard's support, he gained access to medical and psychological treatment, though he chose to maintain his simple lifestyle. He became a bridge between the company and the homeless community, helping develop social reintegration programs. "Mr. Richard, before I was invisible to people like you. Now I see that the invisibility wasn't in me, but in how society chooses not to see," Henry said during one of their conversations. These reflections from Henry deeply influenced Richard, who began questioning many aspects of society he had previously considered natural. Stephen, after serving his sentence and repaying the amounts, sought out Richard for a conversation. He had gotten a new job at a smaller company and was gradually paying off his debts. "Mr. Richard, I know I don't deserve it, but I'd like to thank you for your help during the legal process, and I want you to know I've learned a lot about the consequences of our choices. Stephen, everyone deserves a second chance. What matters is that you've learned and are rebuilding your life honestly." Stephen became an example of redemption. He began giving talks at schools about ethics and the consequences of choices, using his own experience as an example of what not to do. Jennifer, on the other hand, left town after the trial. Richard heard from others that she had moved to another region of the country and was trying to rebuild her life. He never tried to contact her, respecting her need for distance and a fresh start. Rebecca served her full sentence. When she was released 3 years later, she sought out Richard to ask for forgiveness. It was a difficult and emotional meeting. "Mr. Thompson, I know my words cannot undo the harm I've caused, but I need you to know that I deeply regret everything." Richard received her in his office, not without hesitation. "Rebecca, forgiveness is important for all of us to heal, but it's also important that you understand the impact of your actions. I understand, and I want you to know that I used my time in prison to study and prepare for a different life. I no longer want anger and resentment to control my decisions." Richard offered her an opportunity for a fresh start, not in his company, but through contacts who could help her find a job where she could rebuild her life honestly. 2 years after being cleared, Richard decided to write a book about the entire experience, not to play the victim, but to share the lessons learned about leadership, forgiveness, and second chances. "I want others to understand that crises can be opportunities for growth, both personal and professional," he explained to Catherine while working on the manuscript. The book became a success, not because it told a dramatic story, but because it offered deep reflections on universal themes like trust, forgiveness, and the importance of seeing the humanity in every person. During the book launch, Richard made sure Henry was present. In the dedication, he wrote, "To Henry, who taught me that true heroes are often those whom society chooses not to see." Richard's speech at the launch was moving. "This book is not about my victory over the false accusations. It's about how all of us can choose to look beyond appearances and social differences to find our common humanity." Henry, elegantly dressed for the occasion, but maintaining his simple essence, also spoke to the audience. "Sometimes we save people simply by being true to ourselves and having the courage to do what's right." The company continued to grow, but in a different way. The focus was no longer just on profit, but on positive social impact. Social responsibility programs became an integral part of the business model. Amanda gradually took on more responsibilities, preparing to eventually lead the company. Her approach combined Richard's experience with a more modern and socially conscious vision. "Dad, I think this crisis was necessary for our family and our company to evolve," she said, during a strategic planning meeting. "Sometimes you have to almost lose everything to understand what truly matters," agreed Richard. Catherine, who had graduated in psychology, began volunteering with families going through similar crises. Her personal experience made her especially empathetic and effective in her work. "I discovered my true calling through our crisis," she said. "Now I can help other people find strength in their most difficult moments." The Thompson family's transformation became known in the business community as an example of how to face adversity with dignity and use negative experiences as catalysts for positive change. 3 years after the events, Richard received a Corporate Social Responsibility Award. In his acceptance speech, he spoke about the journey that had brought him there. "This award does not celebrate my innocence of the accusations I faced. It celebrates the transformation that all of us can achieve when we choose to respond to adversity with growth, understanding, and compassion." In the audience were Catherine, Amanda, Henry, and many company employees. It was the visual representation of how a crisis had transformed into an opportunity to build more authentic and meaningful relationships. During the ceremony, Richard announced the creation of a foundation aimed at helping people in socially vulnerable situations find new life opportunities. This foundation isn't just about charity. It's about recognizing that we all have value and potential, regardless of our current situation. Henry was invited to be one of the Foundation's advisors, bringing the unique perspective of someone who had lived through the difficulties the organization aimed to help overcome. I never imagined that sleeping on the sidewalk in front of an office building would lead me to become a Foundation advisor, Henry joked during his first official meeting. The Foundation started small but grew quickly. Professional training programs, psychological assistance, and social reintegration became its main activities. Stephen, who had rebuilt his life, became a volunteer at the Foundation, offering financial education courses for people facing difficulties similar to those he had experienced. "I want to use my experience to help others avoid making the same mistakes I made," he said during his first volunteer lecture. The Foundation's success attracted the attention of other companies, which began developing partnerships and similar programs. Richard's personal transformation had become a catalyst for broader social changes. Catherine, with her background in psychology, developed specific programs to help families facing trust and relationship crises. "I've learned that crises can be opportunities for growth, but only if we're willing to face them with honesty and courage," she would say in her family therapy sessions. Amanda implemented mentorship programs at the company, where experienced employees helped new hires not only with professional matters, but also personal ones. "We want every person who works here to know they are seen, valued, and supported," she explained during meetings with new employees. The company culture had completely transformed. The competitive environment focused solely on results gave way to a collaborative space where people's well-being was the priority. 5 years after the recession, Richard reflected on how his life had changed during a morning walk he regularly took with Henry. "Henry, sometimes I think that envelope you brought in the parking lot didn't just save my reputation, it saved my soul. Mr. Thompson, I believe the right people appear in our lives at the right time. I was there because I needed to be, and you were ready to learn because it was your time to grow." The friendship between them had become one of the most important relationships in Richard's life. Henry offered a life perspective that no business book or leadership course could teach. During one of these walks, they encountered a young homeless woman. Henry immediately approached to offer help, while Richard observed the natural way he handled the situation. "This is Mary," said Henry, introducing the young woman. "She's been on the streets for a few months and is still adjusting." Richard spoke with Mary and discovered she had a degree in accounting, but had lost her job and couldn't pay rent. Her story reminded him how many talented, hard-working people were just one crisis away from social vulnerability. "Mary, I'd like you to visit our foundation. We have programs that can help you get back on your feet," offered Richard. 3 months later, Mary was working in Richard's own company in the financial department. Her experience on the streets had given her a unique perspective on resource management and the importance of every opportunity. "Mr. Thompson, I don't know how to thank you for this opportunity," said Mary during her first performance review. "Mary, you don't need to thank me. You deserve this opportunity because of your talent and dedication. I'm the one who should thank you for allowing me to learn from your perspective." Stories like Mary's had become common in the company. The hiring policy had expanded to actively include people who had faced social difficulties, creating a more diverse and humane work environment. Richard's transformation also influenced other business owners in the region. He began to be invited to lectures and events where he shared his experiences and encouraged other leaders to rethink their management approaches. Leadership isn't about being above people. It's about being beside them, especially during difficult times, he would say in his lectures. During one of these lectures, Richard was approached by a young businessman who was facing similar accusations to those he had faced. "Mr. Thompson, I'm going through a situation similar to yours. I feel like my world is falling apart. How did you manage to keep hope?" Hope comes from the certainty that regardless of the outcome, we can choose how to respond to adversity, and that choice defines who we truly are. Richard offered support to the young businessman, connecting him with Dr. Harold and sharing the lessons learned during his own legal battle. The young businessman was later cleared of the accusations and became an active advocate for reforms in the judicial system to better protect innocent people from false accusations. The network of relationships created from Richard's experience continued to expand. People who had been helped began helping others, creating a positive cycle of social transformation. Catherine organized support groups for wives and families of people facing legal or financial crises. Her own experience of nearly losing faith in her husband made her especially qualified to help other women in similar situations. The hardest part isn't facing the external crisis, but dealing with the internal doubts about the people we love, she would say during group sessions. Amanda implemented a special internship program at the company for young people from underprivileged communities, offering not only professional opportunities, but also mentorship and educational support. We want every young person who comes through here to understand that their future isn't limited by their background, she explained to the new interns. One of the interns, John, son of one of the company's cleaning ladies, excelled so much that he received a full scholarship to study engineering. His mother, Mrs. Constance, cried during the scholarship ceremony. "I never imagined my son would have an opportunity like this," she said, emotional. "Thank you for seeing his potential when even I didn't believe." Stories like John's became the greatest source of pride for Richard. Seeing lives transformed through opportunities was more rewarding than any financial success he had achieved in the past. The company continued to grow, but always maintained its focus on human development. Continuing education programs, psychological support, and flexibility for personal situations became pillars of the organizational culture. During an annual company meeting, Richard announced that he was gradually transferring leadership to Amanda, but would maintain his involvement with the foundation and social programs. "The time has come to let a new generation lead this company into the future, while I dedicate myself more intensely to the social work that has become my true passion." The transition was smooth and natural. Amanda had learned not only about business management, but about human leadership and social responsibility from her father. "Dad, I hope to honor not only the financial legacy you built, but especially the human legacy that emerged from our recession," she said during her first speech as the new executive director. Richard became chairman of the company's board and dedicated most of his time to the foundation and to lectures about leadership and social responsibility. Henry, now with a more stable life but keeping his essence, became a respected figure in the community. His life story became an inspiration for many people facing hardships. "Sometimes people ask me if I regret having lived so long on the streets," he said during an interview for a documentary about the foundation. "I answer that every experience, good or bad, prepares us for the moment when we can make a difference in someone's life." The documentary about the foundation and Richard's transformation was shown at film festivals and universities, inspiring discussions about corporate social responsibility and second chances. During the documentary premiere, Richard was asked what had been the most important lesson from his entire experience. "I learned that our true wealth isn't in what we accumulate, but in the lives we touch and transform, and that sometimes, to find our best, we first need to face our worst." In the audience, many of the people whose lives had been impacted by Richard's transformation were present. Employees who received help in difficult times, young people who gained opportunities, families who were supported during crises. Mary, the young accountant who had been found homeless, now coordinated the foundation's financial department. Her journey exemplified the power of second chances. "Mr. Thompson didn't just give me a job. He gave me back my dignity and hope for a better future," she said during her participation in the documentary. Stephen, who had completely rebuilt his life, became a recognized speaker about business ethics and decision-making. His experience served as a warning to other professionals facing moral dilemmas. "My story shows that we always have choices, even in the most desperate situations, and that wrong choices can be turned into valuable lessons if we have the courage to face the consequences and learn from them." The foundation created by Richard expanded to other cities, always keeping the focus on real opportunities for social transformation, not just charity. Catherine completed her specialization in family therapy and opened a practice that served families in socially and economically vulnerable situations free of charge. I discovered that my personal experience, however painful it was, gave me unique tools to help other people, she said during an interview about her work. Catherine's practice became a reference in the region, serving not only families facing legal crises, but also issues related to family conflicts, communication, and relationship rebuilding. Henry, despite keeping his simple life, became a respected public figure. He received honorary citizenship titles and recognition for his social work, but never lost his humble essence. The awards are nice, but what really matters is seeing a person finding a new chance in life, he would say whenever asked about the recognition. 10 years after the recession that almost destroyed his life, Richard wrote a second book, this time focused specifically on the leadership lessons he learned through adversity. This book is for leaders who want to understand that true leadership isn't about power, but about serving and empowering others, he wrote in the introduction. The book became required reading in many business administration colleges and MBA programs, not as a traditional management manual, but as a guide to humanized leadership. During the launch of the second book, Richard was asked if there was anything he would do differently if he could go back in time. I would change many things about how I led my company in the early years, but I wouldn't change the recession we faced because it was necessary for our transformation into better people. The company, under Amanda's leadership, continued growing and became a model of corporate social responsibility. Diversity, inclusion, and employee support programs became benchmarks in the industry. Amanda implemented a policy where 10% of the company's profits were automatically allocated to social programs, ensuring that financial growth always went hand in hand with positive social impact. I learned from my father that true success is measured not just by numbers, but by the positive difference we make in people's lives, she explained in interviews about the company's management. The Thompson family's story became a case study in business schools as an example of how crises can be transformed into opportunities for personal and professional growth. Professors used the case to discuss topics such as business ethics, leadership during times of crisis, social responsibility, and the importance of transparency in organizations. During one of these classes, a student asked the professor, "But what would have happened if Henry hadn't found those burned documents?" "That's an interesting question," replied the professor. "But the most important thing isn't the chance that Henry found the documents. It's the fact that he chose to do something with them, even though he was a person marginalized by society. And it's the fact that Richard chose to respond to the crisis with growth and forgiveness, not with bitterness and revenge." The professor's reflection captured the essence of the story. It wasn't the events themselves that determined the outcome, but the choices made by the people involved. Henry continued his simple life, but now with a clear purpose. Besides his work at the foundation, he became an informal mentor for people facing difficulties similar to those he had faced. "Every person I can help get back on their feet is a victory not just for them, but for all of society," he said during his morning walks with Richard. These walks became a ritual for both of them. It was the moment where they shared reflections about life, discussed new foundation projects, and simply enjoyed the friendship that had been born from such an unlikely situation. "Henry, sometimes I think about how different our lives would be if you hadn't had the courage to run after me in that parking lot," said Richard during one of these walks. "Mr. Richard, I believe that each of us has moments in life where we can choose to make a difference. That was my moment, and I'm happy I made the right choice." Henry's response exemplified the philosophy that had guided the entire transformation, the belief that every person has the power to make choices that can positively impact others' lives. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this moving story. Do you believe that forgiveness can truly transform lives as it did for Richard and his family? Leave your opinion in the comments, and if you liked the story, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories that touch the heart.